Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Johanna. I'm from the UN Innovation Network. And today we're going to be talking about digital transformation, and it's a very opportune time to do so. Those of you who join UN webinars more regularly, or those who read the Secretary General's vision statement, you may have seen that it includes a so-called quintet of change. And this quintet of change, very lofty term, outlines key enablers that the Secretary General believes will be critical to transform the UN and make it fit to respond to challenges of our times and future times. And besides data and strategic foresight, what's the other ones? Behavioral science, performance and results orientation. This quintet of change also includes innovation and digital transformation. And the SG in his vision statement asks that it permeates our work so that we can do our job better. So he expects it to really be a key driver to transforming the UN. So really excited to talk about digital transformation today. Before we dive deeper, I want to get a quick sense from you. So we heard the SG thinks it's important. Let's hear from you. Is digital transformation a priority for your organization? We've launched a quick poll. Help us understand how it's sitting in your organization and help our presenters understand where you stand. And again, those of you who join more often, you'll know we have a rule. We don't close the poll before we hit 75%. So if you haven't voted yet, please do so. Okay, I'll leave it open for a few more seconds. Come on. And there we go. So here's the results. 83% of you think, well, say that digital transformation is a priority for your organization. And only a few say, 3 of you, 4% say it's not. So really interesting, and it's very much aligned with what the SG thinks is critical for the UN. So thanks for telling us. And we're really happy to see there's so much interest in this. We're today going to learn more about UNDP's approach to digital transformation. And you will have some presentations, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A. And as usual, we'll try to take any clarifying questions you have throughout the webinar. And we ask you that you put your questions in the Q&A box, please. On the next slide, you will see it's at the bottom of your screen. You can vote on people's questions in there, and that will help us prioritize the questions that are of most interest and relevance to you. So please do that. Please use the Q&A box and vote on what you find interesting. And as always, the webinar is being recorded. We have a webinar library. You'll see it on our next slide with the link. We'll make the recording available there, and we'll also send it to you via email. And with that, I think we have ticked off the most popular question we usually get. And with that, thanks, Rob. The next slide is perfect. Pleased to introduce you to our presenters for the day. We have Robert Opp. He's the Chief Digital Officer at UNDP and also happens to be the co-chair of UNIN. We'll have Nicola Holden. She's the head of digital culture. And in that role, she focuses on UNDP's internal transformation and building more agile ways of working and really a digital first culture. And we'll also have Gayan Perez, and he's the head of data and technology and co-leads the implementation of the data strategy at UNDP. So really great to have you guys. And I think I'm handing over to you, Rob. Do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Johanna. And greetings to everybody, wherever you are, whichever time zone you're in. It's great to be with you this morning and have a few minutes to share what we're learning about digital transformation, both internally and externally in UNDP. So as Johanna mentioned, my name is Robert Opp. I'm Chief Digital Officer for UNDP. Prior to UNDP, many of you will know me from the work I did at World Food Programme before, where I was heading the Innovation and Change Management Division. And pleased to also be involved with the leadership of UNIN. So I'm going to walk through a couple different topics in terms of introduction to our digital strategy, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So now, UNDP set out a vision a couple of years ago in terms of what it sees around the importance of digital in our development work and supporting the work of the organization. And the vision around the digital UNDP is that UNDP is a thought leader, and I also add sometimes a practice leader in digital development, able to integrate digital technologies into our advisory capacity, our delivery models, and kind of rethinking and reimagining the way we do things. And digital, like in many agencies around the UN, is not something that just started, a year or two ago, because there has been a high level of innovation around digital work and innovation work in general in UNDP for a number of years. And so we have some really strong examples going back even 20 years ago about how ICTs were interacting with development. And there are several country examples. Bangladesh, India are a couple of the sort of best known ones when it comes to coming up with nationally scaled digital solutions. But what the organization did not have is a systematic and coherent view of how the organization itself was enabling its own structures and its own staff to become able to use digital across the board. That was put in place in our strategic plan that was from 2018 to 2021, where we called for a next generation UNDP, and the strategy emerged in 2019, which is basically saying how UNDP really approaches the digital work overall. And that strategy is quite simple in nature, but it basically calls for digital transformation work across two different areas of the organization. So pathway one is about how do we improve our partner experience, our service execution, our service delivery, and so on, using digital. And that can come in the form of the way that we collaborate or co-create models of development with people and partners. It's a reimagining of our services and our offers. And it's a kind of thinking through of how do we reach the world? How do we advocate and most effectively using digital technology? Secondly, it's the second pathway rather is about how digital can be used on the internal systems of the organization. So how can we make ourselves more efficient, more effective as an organization? And that has to do with how do we use knowledge? How do we use data? How do we get the right technology architecture set up so that the organization is as efficient and effective as possible? So when one of the first things of the strategy was to actually create the leadership for the strategy, and that's where the Chief Digital Officer position comes in. The Chief Digital Officer position is a new one for UNDP. In fact, I think it's a new one for the UN system. At least I haven't heard of any other ones out there. And really, it's to create a sense of leadership around this transformation that needs to happen. And so, as I mentioned, I've been appointed the Chief Digital Officer. I have a transformation team that works with me. So we call ourselves the Chief Digital Office for short, or CDO within the organization as we're known. But really, the way that we approach this whole implementing the digital strategy was to kind of look at a few different work streams that need to happen. And in this 4 quadrants of the circle, the 2 on the right are more internally focused, the 2 on the left are more externally focused. I'm going to start internally, and we're going to come back to a number of these topics, so I'm just going to touch them very, very briefly. But technology and data advisory on the bottom right. This is what I was saying before about getting the data and technology architecture for the organization set up to support that internal modernization, that internal leveraging of digital. Capacity building and networks. This is about the people and to a certain extent the processes of the organization that support a cultural shift to digital. This is about the networks that we have in the organization, the skill sets that we're building, the capabilities, and so on. In the top left, this is around digital innovation and scaling support, where, like many organizations, we have a lot of innovation that happens at the field level in UNDP, but that often doesn't translate into scalable models that go to multiple countries or even to their full scale within national contexts. And so part of the digital strategy was that it recognized that there's a need for innovation and scaling support on an ongoing basis for digital work inside UNDP. And then the bottom left is around the new program areas that are emerging as a result of the digital revolution. So things like digital finance and smart cities and those kinds of areas. But also, what are our countries hearing out of our government partners that we're working with, and how are we responding to those requests? So this is how we kind of set ourselves up in terms of work streams. There's some bits in the center as well about, change management, thought leadership, looking at the horizon on what's digital developments coming down the pipe, and partnerships and communications, of course, as part of any change platform. And the Chief Digital Office sits within an ecosystem already in UNDP, where we have several assets around digital that can support the digital work. So many of you will have heard about the Accelerator Lab network. There are now 92 labs within UNDP that cover 116 countries. And these are real engines of innovation at the national level, or at the kind of national office level. But often they're working in digital spaces. And so it's a nice complement that they're able to generate the kinds of innovation ideas and pilots, and then they can be supported elsewhere in the organization through those scaling processes and some of the other work that we're doing. We have a Singapore center that focuses on technology and innovation. We have a global innovation team that's looking at portfolio innovation and how do we support governments with systems-based innovation approaches. Corporate IT, of course, is an important part of the picture when it comes to supporting all of these moves to digital. And then we have a network of digital advocates, which my colleague Nick is going to talk about in just a minute. So just to kind of jump into a few of those work streams, we're not going to cover everything, but just some of the things that might be more interesting for you, we thought we'd pull out and then just discuss them quickly. So I'll just jump quickly to the area that we call digital transformation and country office support. And this really comes as a result of our learnings out of COVID. We're not going to go to it in depth in the presentation, but obviously COVID was a huge accelerator in all of this work. And it taught us a lot in a very short amount of time about what was important about digital, what was less important, in fact, as well. And some of the insights that we have coming out of COVID are that things, for example, like the digital divide is a very severe and urgent issue, perhaps more urgent than we recognized before. That is because as governments moved to quickly put services online in a socially distanced environment, that you could see that people that were not connected, or people that were not able to use or afford connections were left behind. And so how can we really address that issue? So digital divide is critically important. The second thing is that digital transformation in and of itself is not inherently positive when it comes to situations of equality and so on. So we know that if you apply digital in the wrong way, you can leave people out, whether that's because they're not connected, like the digital divide, or you're just not thinking through what it means for elderly people or people with disabilities or others to access digital platforms. So it's important to take an intentionally inclusive approach to digital. Thirdly, there are risks related to digital transformation and digital technologies in general, things that were not created as a result of either COVID or digital platforms, but things that are proliferated. So misinformation, issues around data privacy, hate speech and violence, and so on. And then the last insight coming out of COVID was that we did see that governments that had invested more in digital infrastructure prior to the pandemic were definitely able, in many cases, to scale up their assistance programs much more quickly and effectively than countries that had not made those infrastructure investments. So when we kind of step back and look at where UNDP's value proposition is when it comes to our digital development work, so this is the externally facing side with our partners. One of the things about UNDP is that we can take a strategic and whole of society approach. We often sit with a fairly broad mandate, working with governments on general issues, and we are able to work across different parts of government as well as different parts of society. The second thing is that we are learning more about how to use this intentionally inclusive approach to digital that leaves no one behind. I mean, if you think about what our value add as a human development organization is in the tech space or the digital space, it's not necessarily coming up and being a tech building organization. This is not ever going to be our expertise, but we are the human development organization that can support governments and other partners as they go through a transformation process, and we can advise them on how to ensure no one is left behind in that shift. Thirdly, we take a proactive approach to looking at the ethical risks of technology, so kind of protecting and mitigating against those challenges that I mentioned before. And lastly, working at a global scale, but locally rooted in the ecosystems around the world. So as we have been looking toward our next strategic plan, which starts in 2022, this is the kind of positioning that we have been putting forward. And an important piece of our overall development, our digital development work, has been an increasing signal that is both in frequency and volume from governments around digital transformation overall. And I think that a lot of us will have the experience where digital work at a country level is often, in the same as our organizations actually, often happens in different parts. And so you'll find one ministry working on a database over here, another ministry putting in a registry system over here. Sometimes those systems are fragmented, they're not interoperable. And so you see a lot of fragmentation and confusion in government partners. Like I said, we also see the same issues inside our organizations and the UN system. So it's quite inherent to the way digital is evolving. But what we're trying to do in terms of supporting our government partners with this shift is to sort of put forward this reference model on whole of society digital transformation, or building and developing national level digital ecosystems. And really what this is, and I'm not going to go to in depth, there's many more layers, but it basically just says, you know, in any government that is looking at how do we leverage the benefits of digital transformation and mitigate the risks, we need to establish what is our whole of society ambition and strategy. What do we need to have in place in terms of these pillars across society, across government, in terms of physical infrastructure, business ecosystem, people skills, the regulatory environment, digital government services offered by the institutions themselves of government, and so on and so forth. Then there will be a certain number of sectoral opportunities and directions that can be taken, and then some foundational digital catalysts. And these are things like digital identity platforms, digital payment gateways, and things like that. We have found this a very interesting approach with our partners to be able to say, well, you know, you're asking us for support in one part of your digital journey, but have you considered the different components that are dependent sometimes on each other? So there's no point putting in a really elaborate, you know, sort of basic, you know, technology architecture if you don't have a local ecosystem there to support it, or else you're going to have to think of it in a different way. And so far, throughout COVID, we've supported about over 100 countries in different requests of digital development. But there are 12 governments in which we're going through that whole of society digital transformation process. There's a few examples on this slide, but this is proving to be, as I said, we have another 10 to 15 countries on a waiting list to get to when it comes to this digital transformation support overall. And so we're finding this to be an interesting and important platform that also allows us to connect with other members of the UN country team on the ground, other partners like whether they be tech companies, academic institutions, and others. It's a positioning where we're finding a lot of support and positive feedback coming from our partners. Now, so that's a big piece around our digital transformation support with our partners. I wanted to switch quickly to the Digital X Accelerator. This is another quadrant on that circle that I mentioned. This is around the phenomenon that I spoke about, which is innovations are happening locally. They don't organically scale in the organization often. We do see that sometimes, but it's not a scaling pathway. So what we decided to do, and this is inspired by some of the work that we did at UNDP and other places, or WFP rather, but to create a Digital X Scaling Accelerator. And so that Scaling Accelerator functions like any other accelerator. So looking for ideas that can be brought in and then supported to become successful. But we're looking specifically for proven ideas that can then be really focused on scale from the beginning. And so we did a sort of first test run in our journey early on in the early part of 2020. And then toward the end of 2020, we launched officially the Digital X Scaling Accelerator, which has taken in a cohort of the first 10. Those will be kind of graduating from acceleration toward the end of the year. And then we're going to take lessons learned and then iterate on that. So the Digital X is a fully virtual program right now. Whether we stay fully virtual in the future is a question mark. It's an interesting kind of circumstance that we've all been put in terms of trying to understand what are the benefits and values of being together physically versus virtually. But we have organized this over the sort of the course of about 6 months of intense acceleration. And as I said, learning lessons, and would love to hear from those of you who have interesting ideas that we might also collaborate with as we go forward in successive cohorts. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn over to my colleague Nick, and she's going to talk about some of the internal work that we're doing around digital culture. And Nick, you should be able to advance the slides now.
Wonderful, thanks, Rob. Firstly, hi everybody. So yes, my name is Nick. So I guess you could say in terms of digital transformation, my job is really to focus on the people, particularly the people inside our very large organization. So Rob's shown you a bunch of the fantastic work that's happening, that the organization is doing to work with governments to make situations better in country. But we've also got this enormous organization spread across over 170 countries and changes need to happen there as well. So that's where I come in. Let me just see if my slides work there. So essentially, my role is to try to create change, global change, in this system of an organization which is networked, global, and totally decentralized. So offices all over the world speaking different languages, different cultures in each office. And to do that, really what we're trying to do is create a movement. So humans with our nature tend to kind of rally behind a movement, and indeed that's what we're trying to create within UNDP. This is the movement so far. These are all the happy humans. We've even got one gentleman doing a dab there in the back. They're people who have been nominated to be digital advocates. So we call them the Digital Advocate Network. They are all over the world, various different levels within their teams, and also they come from different sets of expertise. Lots, so maybe almost half come from within UNDP's many accelerator labs, so innovation accelerator lab teams across the world, because of course they're naturally kind of thinking and living digital by nature. But then we have lots of other people from different backgrounds coming in as well. And the beautiful thing about a network of humans, when you rally them together, is there's a real sharing of ideas, sharing of kind of, you know, case studies and best practice and what's working and what's difficult. And so it's the power of the many, really, rather than kind of just relying on the few people you might know. So this is the power of the movement. Going into a little more detail, the Digital Advocates Network has one advocate in each of our around about 170 country offices, and then also the regional bureaus, and also head office. The digital advocates support ideas and initiatives aimed at improving country and internal outcomes. So they're very much focused on how the country offices better serve governments, partners, and societies. But it's also about looking internally and helping to build capability amongst colleagues and leadership, and new ways of working, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. The network itself is the key. So it's about connecting people, connecting ideas, connecting intelligence, we say collective intelligence, and indeed success stories across the globe. We work at a global scale, but it's very much rooted in local ecosystems, local needs, local problems, local solutions. The other thing that the advocates are doing, and that we're doing with people in general at UNDP, is to create what we call digital by default. So instead of digital being an afterthought, like we want to create, for example, maybe a gender outcome, better job opportunities for women in this particular part of society, in a particular country, instead of digital potentially being an afterthought.
Sorry, Nick, I'm messing with your screen. I'll
Okay.
stop touching my mouse.
Okay, you do that. We're trying to make digital be the default, so that the first thing you think of. Hey, if we're trying to create more jobs for women, could this be done digitally? That's the first thought, rather than potentially an afterthought amongst because we've got so many amazing experts in this organization. So it's just a matter of kind of embedding digital into the thinking and the way things are done. The other thing, of course, is capability. So uplifting capability in the organization so everyone can feel more confident to talk digital, do digital, speak digital, all the rest of that. There we go. So we have a team of, now 200 plus. So this is my point, that changing the culture of an organization and the way work is done and stuff sounds like a very intimidating job across the globe, and with all of those, and we've got almost 20,000 people in UNDP. But when you've got a team of 200, now that feels doable. So I feel, really rallied by our extended team across the organization, and their enthusiasm, intelligence, and skill. And I have no doubt we'll be able to take the organization forward in leaps and bounds. I think that's all from me. I will hand over to Gayan.
Thank you, Nick. Let me see if my screen controls work. Hello, everyone. My name is Gayan Piris, and I co-lead the implementation of the data strategy of UNDP with our IT department and also our global policy network. UNDP's data strategy is underpinning the digital strategy, and it is also closely aligned with Secretary General's data strategy. The challenge in UNDP was not that we don't work with data, but our teams work with data, but in silos. The challenge was to bring these silos together. There was an opportunity to bring these silos together under the data strategy and drive UNDP to use data as a strategic asset and therefore become a data-driven organization. Now, before I go to the strategy, we wanted foundations. There's so much a strategy can cover within a given time frame, and we wanted foundations, a guiding star for us to build the strategy on. And we have 8 data principles now in UNDP with privacy at its core. And you can see the very first principle is safeguarding personal data with privacy by design at the core. But I want to bring your attention to the 4th one, making data open by default. As UNDP, we publish all our project and program information into the IRT Aid Transparency Initiative, but this is going further, publishing the surveys that we do, the socioeconomic response surveys that we do. Our Crisis Bureau collects data and information. So through this strategy, we are moving towards publishing them with masking or safeguarding the personal information as well. These principles, I'm not going to go into each one. These principles are available online on our website. And our strategy is built on these foundations on 3 pillars, namely people, governance, and technology. And under people, there's this misconception in that data is the responsibility of a data analyst or an economist or a statistician or even sometimes management. But we want to change that. We want the admin person in a country who manages the driver's roster to understand the value of data privacy. We want our project officers, program officers to get consent from users when they collect data for their surveys to measure impact on their projects. We want our advisors, policy advisors, digital advisors to understand the data security, data management, data governance issues when they advise the governments on digital transformation. So for this, we have launched a series of capacity building initiatives in the organization. Nick talked about the networks. We have trainings, webinars happening in the organization at all levels, from basic data trainings to more advanced machine learning, AI, and data governance related topics as well. And on the governance side, we have a very value-driven governance process where we provide a set of guide rails for users at country level to be agile in their data projects. But for some reason, if they deviate, then we have created a clear path, including a data governance group in organization, to help them, to assist them in those queries, and also set standards at the corporate level. And also on the technology front, we are aiming for corporate centralized data system where there's a no-code, low-code environment, which means you don't have to store your data anymore in your laptop or buy a statistical package to do your analysis. Instead, we are providing those tools and technologies corporately, and also there was a question on the ERP in Q&A as well. We are connecting all our data systems into a data lake, and through that, making a data catalog available for UNDP, a very searchable internal catalog and a publicly available catalog where we publish the information that we can into the public domain. And through a partnership with Microsoft, we are progressing well on the technology front to build this architecture for UNDP. And the first strategic effort to have this strategy in action is the Data Futures platform, which is available on data.undp.org. And I invite you to visit this site. There are some very interesting analysis on the 5 pillars of socioeconomic recovery from COVID. There's some interesting analysis on temporary basic income. There are some country level analysis as well. There's data available on the socioeconomic surveys that they're doing at country level. And also my personal favorite, which is 1.2 million people telling us the future they want through the UN 75 initiative. So all the data and the analysis is made available through this platform at data.undp.org. That's about it from me. I will hand over the presentation back to Nick and Rob to take us through the next section.
And I think the next session is discussion, if I'm not mistaken. I want to apologize to Nick for advancing the slides and moving all over. What I was trying to do is trying to read your questions, but I kept messing with the slides. So apologies for that.
No big deal. No big deal.
So Johanna, how would you like to handle the Q&A? I haven't had a chance now to look at the questions that are there, but fire away for us, please.
Guys, and I think we can take the screen off now so that we can see you guys all together. Thanks for that. Thanks for a great presentation. Using a quick segue, because we talked about Data Futures platform, there's actually a webinar being hosted by our friends at the Data Strategy team. So if you want to learn more about that, join the webinar 15th of July, and we can dive into that. I have a lot of questions for you guys. We'll try and get through as many as possible. Colleagues, if you have questions, please do add them to the Q&A box, and please like questions that are of interest to you to help us prioritize them, and we'll try and get to you. I will take one that I personally like a lot, and just say here that if you included your name, we will try to give you the floor, so please pay attention and then you can ask the question yourself. But let's start with this one. I really liked it. Rob, in your presentation, you said you learned what was less important about digital during COVID. Can you actually share what was that?
Yeah, well, so some interesting findings came out when COVID hit globally. Our country offices started responding to different requests from our partners for digital, different kinds of digital services or responses or support. I would say, so we learned, I talked about the important things like digital divide and things like that. An interesting finding is when we analyzed the 200 and I think we have 263 different examples of digital responses from within UNDP, they were heavily skewed toward, I would say, more of the basic technology things. So people were a little less interested in doing, extremely complex exploration into blockchain and artificial intelligence, and they were just trying to respond with basic database management, information management, analytics, that kind of thing. Now, that's not to say, and the way we approach this is not that we're not keeping an eye on, the kind of more emerging and exotic technologies. It's not that, because we have, experimentation with blockchain and AI and IoT and everything. But, the signals that we heard out of government for their urgent responses were really a little bit more on the basic side. And so that's where we had to make sure that we were focusing some of the support that we mounted in that regard.
Thank you very much. Great question. So we're now going to try and take some questions from the floor, and I'm coming to you, Michael, from OICT. You should be able to talk. Please go ahead and feel free to. Oops, hang on. Yes, Michael, you should be allowed to talk. Not, I'll take the question myself. Okay, Mr. Chance, Michael. So Michael is from OICT based here in New York, and he's wondering, how is your experience fostering a culture of data sharing? Do you take specific actions in this regard? And maybe, Guyan, that's a question for you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll take that question. Very interesting question. One of the challenges that we see in this is UNDP being a vast ocean of data. We have our project program information, we have our operational information, then our practice teams have their information as well. We want to, because it's a vast ocean, we want to prioritize in areas where we can publish, which is, as a result, we have this Data Futures platform now, teams coming together to publicly publish or share the data. So as UNDP, we produce a lot of reports, blog posts. And if you ask, very often there's no way to trace the findings back to the data. So we are promoting a culture where we publish or share the data as well, along with the analysis that we do, and also start data sharing within internal teams. So we value from each other's data and the analysis that we do, and also share data publicly. At the same time, we talk about interoperability of systems as well, so we can share within agencies and really value from the data that we collect as UN, not as a single agency.
That is obviously music to my ears. You say the word interagency and I'm happy. A big issue, I think, data sharing across the UN, so great to see that you guys are working on it. Trying my luck with Dalia. I believe Dalia is from WFP in Cairo. Dalia, do you want to come in and ask the question yourself?
Hello, yes, I'm in WFP, but currently I'm in Tunis for Libya operations, not in Cairo. So I don't know how you got the Cairo bit, maybe from a previous registration. Okay, so basically I'm asking here about how does the UN in general align the different efforts that agencies do in terms of digital services for governments. WFP has been doing a lot of work with governments in terms of digital aligning its CSPs or the country strategic plans with the digital initiatives that are coming from governments. So we want to avoid the overlapping and we want to avoid the replicating of efforts. So how is the UN in general handling this? That's my question. Thank you.
Shall I jump in on that, Johanna? I think the reality is that we are not as coherent and coordinated as we need to become. And the RC system and DCO, which is supporting the RC system, is definitely looking into this issue and how the RCs can become a supporting part of the rollout of the digital cooperation roadmap in general, that has been that sort of effort led by the Secretary General and things like that. But it's our hope that we can, find a better platform to work together on. So from our point of view, what's important when it comes to the way that we're supporting governments on this kind of more holistic digital transformation is that we're doing that as part of a broader UN country team as well. And we've seen some examples of how that is working in different countries like Dominica and Moldova and Kosovo and other places. It's really important that we as the UN are not fragmented in our advice to governments as well, because they themselves might be fragmented. So what we need to make sure that we try to jointly advocate for is leadership at a central level from the government side to sort of clarify what is the kind of overall ambition and strategy. This is how we would recommend to governments anyway, in terms of looking at how do all these different pieces fit together, because there are some basic fundamental pieces that we want to make sure that we're doing together. In other words, it does not make sense for a health-related project to drive a digital identity platform for the country when, you know, it's like that should really be a centrally made decision that can cover everything. So we're not, as a UN system, we're not there yet, but I think that through the support of DCO, the RC system, and then our agencies coming together around some of these more holistic platforms, that's where we need to go.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks very much for the question, Dalia. Holly, we're coming to you now. Holly is our focal point from the World Bank based in DC, I believe. Holly, please feel free to take the floor.
Great, thanks. Yeah, at the World Bank, we are huge fans of the Chief Digital Office, and so it was really nice to get a chance to learn a little more about the program. I'm particularly interested in the Digital Advocates Initiative, so this question is for Nick. Because at the World Bank, we are doing something very similar, and it's reassuring that we have come to the same conclusion on how to drive change across the organization. But we had to make a lot of decisions on how to design it, and I wanted to compare notes. I was wondering how the digital advocates were recruited. Like, did the country teams nominate them? Did they have to apply? And how you regularly engage them to ensure they're retained? Like, are they mandated to participate, or are you using hearts and minds to keep them motivated to engage? And do they charge their time for their efforts? Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you, Holly. I'm so glad that I also have the question typed so I can remember all the bits. So how will they, first of all, I think it's great that we're in parallel, you know, trying to create movements within our organizations, and we should probably also share notes offline sometimes. So let's connect. Super briefly though, here I would say, so how were they recruited? So we put quite a clear kind of job description for the role, and then we asked what RRs, which so the head of each country office, to nominate somebody. Now, the reason we did that is so that we made sure that it was very visible to the leadership of the country office that they chose someone that they thought would be right for the role. We were quite clear that it needed to be someone who was sort of senior enough to be able to kind of drive change and make some decisions, but also obviously not so senior that their calendars were back to back and they didn't have enough headspace or time for it. So that's a real balance. Having said that, which I think is a good approach, having them nominated, there's also natural champions all throughout this organization. There's people who are so pro-digital that they're doing it anyway. So what we're also working to do is to rally all of those people who I'm calling informally the digital champions, as opposed to formally the advocate, so that we can grow that team of 200 to like a team of 1,000. Then we can really make change. So I think that my answer is that ideally you can have both, but it is really good to have, in our case, one nominated advocate in every country office that we know who we can liaise with and go to, and can really be a focal point. But I've told them, don't work alone, rally all the people around you, and let's do this all together. They're regularly engaged, yes, to ensure retention. I mean, I feel like you said, do you do it by mandate, or do you hearts and minds? I definitely do hearts and minds. I mean, it's a role and they were requested, of course, but I don't think that's the way to really make change. I think real change happens with hearts and minds. So can they charge their time? Gosh, Rob might have to answer. That's kind of a technical question, but it's part of their role. So they're asked to give at least 2 hours a week to the role. And then we also have a different role in the regional bureaus called digital facilitators, who are asked to give around 10 hours per week of their regular, you know, cut off their regular work and allocate 10 hours to this network. So you can imagine accumulated, that's a lot of energy and effort going into it. So I don't know if you want to add anything there, Rob.
No, just on the last point, Nick, we're not currently, let's say, creating a cost center for advocates to charge their time. If we had to increase that in the future, we might look into something like that. But for the moment, with that sort of 1 or 2 hours a week model, we haven't included it.
Great to see you're working on something similar, and hope there can be an exchange of notes and deeds. I want to just piggyback on that question with something that Francesca from UNICEF is wondering, and she's saying, besides the digital advocates, what else are you doing to challenge the resistance to change? So assuming there is resistance to change, have you experienced it, and how are you trying to address it in addition to the digital advocates?
Go ahead, Nick.
Rob, are you waiting?
No, you start, and I'll compliment.
Maybe just my first thought is that, again, imagine UNDP is this organization full of incredible specialists that cross many different thematic areas. So you've got specialists in gender, specialists in governance, specialists in climate. So those people are, extreme experts. So it's all about making, we almost need to have also experts in digital and gender, digital and climate, digital and governance, because of course digital is sort of enabler and it embeds all of those things. So it's not enough to just kind of sit in a little island and talk digital and blockchain and new technology. That's not really the change. The change is that all of our wonderful experts can all, learn the language of digital and kind of embed it into their thinking around their thematic, their deep expertise, I guess. Rob, how am I doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this question also goes into kind of there was something on resistance to change as well and things like that. So what we haven't highlighted everything that's going on. One of the important things that is going on is, as Nick said, within our thematic teams, which span all the different areas of UNDP's mandate, like nature, climate and energy, and governance, and crisis prevention, and so on. All of those teams are also working to transform their offers into the sort of digital space. And a general comment that kind of, comes up when we think about where are the sort of resistance areas in a way. This is, I would say that there's a big difference between using digital as a tool and understanding that digital is part of our context in which we're operating. And that is a big shift that we're trying to move from. So we have lots of innovation around the organization in terms of, I'm going to take, this technology, I'm going to apply it to this development problem. And we have wonderful examples of that. Scaling is the other issue that's, I think, coming up. But so that's fine. But we have to also understand that we're doing this in a context which is rapidly shifting because of those same digital technologies that are impacting worldwide. So it's really that sort of difference between doing digital and being digital that we're trying to get after. And that's not simple for an organization that in some cases has, despite all the innovation, still has people who aren't that comfortable in the digital space, but they know they need to get there. But to get them all the way to that sort of being digital, like sort of living and breathing digital, that's challenging, but that's ultimately where we need to go as an organization.
Challenging journey indeed, I'm sure, but great to see you making progress towards it. We're going to take the next question, which again links very nicely. So thank you all for lining up questions so perfectly. And it's from, I believe, a team member of yours. So Marianne, do you want to come in and ask your question around learning? Okay, so we don't have Marianne ready to ask the question. I'll take it for her. Is it easy to build capacity in digital form without any background? How can we have user-friendly tools for self-training? And related to that, a question from Kirsten. Are there LinkedIn learnings that you mentioned available outside of UNDP?
Good question. So I'll take the first one. I think in terms of building digital capacity and people from a range of backgrounds and having it be user-centered. I mean, first of all, our whole team takes a very human-centered approach. So in all that we do, we start with the people we're trying to serve. So even the advocates, we started with the digital advocates, we started with what they needed, what kind of capacity building did they need, what kind of skills, and in what ways would they like that to happen. So first of all, don't assume. Go in and ask the people that you're trying to reach and find out what works best for them. If I did just some really broad brushstroke generalizations, though, I would say, I mean, first of all, be utterly sensitive to various languages. You also need to be sensitive to kind of learning styles. Some of us are very visual, others like to take time to process things. They don't like in-person virtual workshops. They want time to kind of digest and process information. So giving options is my first one. The next one I would say is that there is so much information, especially on digital in the world, that it's utterly overwhelming. I mean, go to YouTube and you see. So I think the other point is to curate, be a curator, choose the most relevant kind of courses and content that you think is most relevant. In this case, it's quite unique. It's digital development. It's very specific. So curate for the people you're trying to build capability in. One other point is to slightly gamify it. I mean, we're humans and we respond to that sort of thing. So wherever possible, badges, certificates, acknowledging people for their effort for learning, elevating their efforts, making sure that they can, show all the work they put in and the achievement that they made. I think that's really important. And last but not least, I've heard regularly, I think this might be a bit of a general UN, but definitely UNDP thing, is that when people need to know something that they're not sure about, they're less likely to go to a platform and more likely to phone a friend. It's really an organization built on trust and relationships. So in that sense, the network itself, the Digital Advocates Network, is a crucial part of building capability, because as they get to build trust and know each other, they are the friends that they're going to be phoning to be asking questions about things that'll help to build capability. So peer-to-peer is the final point that I would say. That's me.
Any thoughts on the LinkedIn Learning courses? Are they available outside of UNDP?
Good point. I actually don't know how to answer that one. Rob, do you know?
Well, I mean, we would have to pay for it if it was, but that's something that, at the moment, I mean, we've talked about how might we extend the training courses also to government counterparts and things like that as well. That's kind of coming in the future. So at the moment, it's a UNDP-wide offering, but I don't know. We could look at that later. Might be something to discuss in the context of UNID.
One thing I could suggest if someone wants to jump in and start learning now is that DIAL, D-I-A-L, have a fantastic free self-directed course online that you can grab at the moment on the principles for digital development. No, I'm going to say that wrong. Let me put that in the chat. I'll put the link in the chat so everyone's got the right link. But it's a very, very good course, very thorough, and not too long, won't take too much of your time, and I recommend it.
Great, thanks so much. And please do put it in the chat and we'll happily email it out later as well. Marie, coming to you for your question. The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Mary Kannambura from UN Global Pulse. I was interested in knowing, how does the UNDP scaling strategy apply to when it comes to scaling of internal innovations in the UN agencies? We have heard a lot of them in this UNIN network organized by Johanna.
Yeah, let me try to answer that. So, I think scaling is in part going to be unique to each agency, but in part there are many shared pathways as well. So, so I think if the question is more around, how can we kind of take lessons learned? I mean, basically what we see are a couple different models for scaling. There is the model around a kind of replication between countries, which is kind of a very entrepreneurial sort of thing where you have something that works really well in one place and then it just kind of jumps horizontally. But you can also have scaling that kind of, you see a digital innovation taking a kind of corporate solution nature, and then that can be offered out. And we're experimenting with both of those in UNDP right now in the context of this Digital X Accelerator. The Digital X Accelerator, by the way, focuses right now, it's exclusively focused on internal innovations, although some of them have partnered with local startups and things like that. About half of the 10 in the first cohort are. In the future, we might expand that to look at more externally origin innovations as well. But for the moment, it's about really how do we get the internal side of things. And the kind of basic things that you need to have in place for scaling, things like ownership somewhere in the organization. You need to have some kind of bottleneck or some process work on your most common bottlenecks. So we're looking into all of those same things in UNDP. So we'll be happy to share the lessons as we kind of go down the journey on that. We already have some sort of ideas. And then of course, there's organizations like UNICEF and WFP that have been doing this for years as well. Very similar observations in some cases. In some cases, it has to be tailored to the organization. So I hope that answers the question. Oh, and I should say, Digital X, I was saying it's primarily internal, but for us, we would consider internal also other organizations in the UN. So if there are partnerships that we can work on in the scaling context, we would be happy to look at those too.
Thank you very much. Again, music to my ears. Realizing we're running a little bit out of time, let me take a few rapid fire questions. Evelyn from EFAD is wondering, are cryptocurrencies included in the digital strategy, and are you going to be financing projects in crypto?
Yeah, quick answer to that. They're not included in the current digital strategy, but there is, we as UNDP, including our Chief Financial Officer and our Treasurer, are definitely looking at cryptocurrencies in terms of their potential for us. It's a little bit along the line of inquiry that UNICEF has done, but going also a little bit beyond that to say how might we incorporate those programmatically. So there's a whole other digital finance discussion around that as well. But those are sort of in early stages, I would say.
Thank you. Good news again. And I want to take two maybe related questions for Gayan on data sharing. So Kirsten here is saying it's very difficult to do with externals. How do you handle that? And then related, Wajira, data sharing is a huge issue in the UN system. What tools are available at your disposal to make it work at this time?
Thank you, Johanna. So the answer is actually a combination of technology and governance, actually, to have processes in place before publishing data, and also modern day technologies offer detecting PII, personally identifiable information, at the row level and even at the field level as well. So I can talk about technology all day, but moving a bit away from technology, we figured the technology offers what we want, but the real issue is in the culture. It is related to the earlier question as well. And we are implementing a set of tools that are, some are proprietary, some are open source. When it comes to data catalog, CCAN and things like that, and Databricks and things like that, open source. But when it comes to culture, it is about, I think, identifying champions who are willing to take that first step and let them lead the organization towards that culture change of data sharing, which is what we are trying to do through the data.undp.org platform.
Great. It's not all about tools, it's all about culture. Thank you. And realizing we need to wrap up in 1 minute, and I think, Rob, you need to go. I want to finish with the last question from Fazal, who's joining us from MONUSCO in DRC. And he's saying, what is the initiative that you're most proud of? What is the one that has had real change and impact, led to real change and impact so far?
Okay, so just on the spot, I mean, I would divide those into sort of, there's kind of programmatic ones, and then there's some sort of organizational ones. But you know, programmatically, we've seen coming directly out of the digital strategy, the creation of a new consultation platform, which many of you may have used. It's called Spark Blue. That's been headed by our policy and program colleagues. And there are, I mean, like there's probably too many to mention on the sort of what's gone on in countries and different things. But I would maybe focus the answer a little more on, you know, real change initiatives. And we're still kind of in the early stages of some of these things, but I think the real things that are going to drive change will be the digital advocates work that Nick has talked about, the digital by default step, which is literally putting in place the system whereby any new project in UNDP must identify its digital components or explain why there are no digital components to it. So those things will be kind of universal. And then, you know, the kinds of having a data strategy in place was a big step forward. So from the time when we started this effort in sort of the end of 2019, we now have a new IT strategy. We have a new data strategy. Both are under implementation in parallel and you know, closely coordinated. And these are going to create huge change in the organization over time.
Thank you for that assessment, and thanks to all three of you for coming in and sharing your experiences with us. Really great to learn from you guys. Please consider it a standing invitation to come back anytime and share how it's going. No pressure at all on your shoulders, Nick. Hey, digital advocate is going to be key. So good luck with that. Really, really appreciate you coming. Thank you so much. And also taking a moment to say thank you to everyone behind the scenes who helped make this happen. So we had Kumiko, we had Carolyn, we had Mariange, we had Yolanda. Thank you, the entire team for being with us today. We'll share everything via mail, and we'll also put it onto our new Union team space. So if your question, if we didn't get a chance to get to it, maybe we can follow up there. Yeah, so thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. Learned a lot today. And yeah, appreciate you sharing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna.
Thanks.